Yo, what is going on, everybody? It is Chad here with an Indie OT podcast for BetHubb .com. 24 hours removed from the Vancouver Canucks being defeated in the first round of the 2012 playoffs to the number 8 seed Los Angeles Kings in 5 games. I've now had an opportunity to think things over and provide you guys with some full analysis in terms of why this team failed so miserably in this year's playoffs. And I'll start off with the fact that the core of this team was completely overvalued going into this season, and Mike Gillis did not do a good enough job of making the proper assessments of what this team was really capable of doing. And the reason why I say that is, once again, they went ahead and won the President's Trophy, which means nothing. And when I mean nothing, I literally mean nothing. It is the most useless trophy and accomplishment a team can get in professional sports these days. Why? Because most of the teams in the league don't even care about it, and they set their regular season up so that they're ready for the playoffs and have zero attention to even caring about winning the President's Trophy. And when you think of the way the Canucks are comprised with two very good goaltenders, it makes it a lot easier for them to win games in the regular season than other teams. We'll get to the whole goalie controversy later on in this rant. But other teams have terrible backup goalies because they know in the playoffs it doesn't matter. They're going to ride their number one starter, so they're willing to throw away certain games knowing their chances of winning are not as good. And then on top of that, you look at the division they play in, and it's an absolute joke. For the second year in a row, not one other team has made the playoffs with them. So that right there makes it a lot easier throughout the year. When you play 8 games against every team in your own division, that means you're playing nearly half your schedule, 32 games against terrible teams that didn't make the playoffs. It makes it a lot easier. And I know a lot of people can come back and say, well, Chad, you're just disregarding the fact that they stepped up well and they played good against all the top-notch teams when they had to in the regular season. How do you discount that? No, it's not that I discount it. It's just that it makes the entire year easier. It makes you coast through the year. And when you have that one great team on your schedule every couple of weeks, it's so much easier to prepare for it as a team, to get mentally into it, to have your practices designed around it when you can coast through the other games. Whereas the other teams like LA, who play in a much more difficult division with San Jose and Phoenix all competing for the division title and making the playoffs, Dallas in the hunt the whole year, Anaheim improving when they made the coaching change from Carlisle to Boudreau, it made them have to go through a grind every single game, not just once every 5 games, 6 games when they played other divisions, which means that they're more ready for the playoffs in these type of series. And I'd like to compare it almost to NCAA college football. When you look at a team like Boise State, who constantly steps up to the occasion when they play teams from other conferences that are highly ranked teams, they always play well against them because it's so much easier when every other game is against these poor teams that they're going to dominate no matter what. But then the other SEC teams are forced to grind out that schedule throughout the entire year, and that's why they have such success in the bowl season, because they're going up against opponents that are probably worse than who they've had to play within their own conference the entire year. So that right then and there, Gillis does not put enough stock into it. They go, oh, we've got all these points, it's so fantastic, top of the league. If we continuously finish with the best record, then that means we have a cup contending team. And when you look at the difference from this year to last year, it was night and day. Last year they were steamrolling teams. The goal differential this year compared to last year was like a complete goal difference. Last year we were first in goals for and goals against. Didn't even come close to that feat this year. The Canucks went the entire final 2 months of the season from February on, and they averaged 2 goals a game or less. That is inexcusable, and he did not do a good enough job of assessing the overall offensive capabilities of this team. I think that he overvalued the core of this hockey team. Last year, every single player had a career season. The Sedins with over 100 points, MVP seasons. Kessler, 41 goals and over 70 points. Burrows, 35 goals. Do you really think those guys were going to duplicate that season again? I mean, it'd be next to impossible. You had to figure there'd be some sort of a regression, or at the very best maintaining that level. Same thing with guys like Edler and Bieksa and Hamhuis on the back end. And if that's the case, they didn't add anybody else. Everybody else in the conference got better. As a matter of fact, they lost players, so to expect this team to improve is absolutely asinine. And you would figure Ehrhoff, the guy who was the number 1 offensive defenseman, just completely left, and there was zero attempt to replace him. Oh, but hey, wait, you would figure that they would try to use someone like Keith Ballard. After all, they are paying him over $4 million a year. Gillis made a huge deal at the draft 2 years to bring him in. But, the coach, he doesn't like him. He's a healthy scratch in favor of guys like Alberts and Rome the last few years. And I'm not saying that those are necessarily the wrong decisions from Coach V, but what I'm saying is, how is a general manager going to go out there and bring in a player of that caliber with that kind of money and not at least consult his coach and say, is this the kind of player that you think can fit within this team, instead of just wasting all that money on somebody in the press box? I mean, there's a huge lack of communication and being on the same page, which I believe is a huge problem for the team, and there's no reason not to think that he should have been given a bit more of an opportunity. I know that he was injured this year with a concussion and came back later in the year, but this is something that dated all the way back to last season as well. And when it comes to some warning signs with this team here, I think it was pretty apparent last year in the playoffs against Boston. When we play big physical teams, we cannot score. Same thing in the Nashville series. And when you look at the way the teams that are having success in the West are built this year, they're all big, bruising, grinding teams that like to grind you out and play solid defense down low and don't give you an inch to breathe. And we really struggle against those teams scoring goals. So that has been a major issue. And I don't think they did enough to address that. And I believe what happened was Gillis probably realized that a little bit too late, and that's what triggered the whole Hodgson for Kassian deal at the trade deadline. Now, we don't know exactly what happened in terms of the reasons behind that. There's all the rumors about how he wanted more playing time, blah, 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 blah. But the thing that I don't understand about it is, if your main intention of that trade was to make the team tougher, you can't make your team tougher on the fourth line with guys that play 3 minutes of ice time a game. You've got to make the core of the team tougher. And if the Canucks were relatively successful, at least one of the better teams in the league, regardless of them choking in the playoffs, playing a run and gun, more offensive style, why would you change it with 2 months left in the regular season? If you're going to make that big of a change, you got to do it in the offseason to allow the coaching staff an entire offseason to come up with a plan instead of just sort of throwing it on them like that. And you have to make more of a change within the team, not just one player. And when you look at someone like Kassian, I knew he was never going to play in the playoffs. Vigneault hates rookies. He never gives them the playing time that maybe they deserve because he wants more responsible defensive players. And Gillis, all he did was preach depth the whole year. That was one of the main reasons they refused to trade Schneider-Luongo, because in case one of them went down and there's a poor performance, they had a solid backup. Well, does that concept only work with goalies, which makes no sense, instead of forwards? Because last time I checked, any one of the top 6 forwards that gets injured, Hodgson would be a very capable person of filling in on that role, and we saw that on full display when the injury happened to Daniel Sedin in the first few games. We had to see Andrew Ebbett on the second power play unit. That's an embarrassment. The team with the most points in the NHL as a career minor league player seeing playoff power play time? No. If Hodgson was healthy, he would have been on there and it would have made a world of a difference. So don't tell me that you want to have depth in net when you can't utilize one of those players, but you don't want to have it at forward when it makes more sense. And that brings me to the whole goalie situation here, which is something that I never understood in the first place. Yes, I know that you have 2 great goalies, and it doesn't matter, because when you're in the playoffs, only one of them can play. What sense does it make having one of your best players have 0 impact on the game? I mean, you got to trade one of those assets and bring in more help up front and on the back end, and they completely neglected that. And I know it's a lot easier said than done, because you can't necessarily get the trade you want during the year, but he could have done that in the offseason last year. I believe Schneider had proven enough that somebody would have provided us with some sort of assets in return. And at the very least, they could have done it in December, maybe trade Luongo, that is, when he got injured and Schneider showed that he was very capable of taking over as a full-time starter. And I don't want to hear all this BS about Luongo, the no-trade clause, because at the end of the day, if you put Schneider in as a full-time starter and he's sitting on the bench, you'll go to management and waive that no-trade clause. And if you wanted to trade Schneider, he would have never been opposed to it in the first place. Deals could have been out there. Sure, they may have not been the best. But if Gillis wants to come out here and preach that this team is contending for the cup now, you have a very short window in today's NHL with the salary cap and players moving, and this core is not that young either. So that goes back to my whole overvaluing this team. It's not like you have a bunch of guys in their young 20s where you can see the ceiling of their careers getting higher. No. These guys have all hit their peaks. If anything, I expect a bit of a regression here in the future, and he completely missed the boat by not wanting to deal one of these goalies here to make the rest of the team better. So those are my big issues with everything. And, they can talk all day long about how they won all these games down the stretch by 1 goal, but it was just very unimpressive. All these shootout games, it just wasn't the same style that they were playing last last year when they got to the Cup Finals. You even look back on that Chicago series, there's not a chance in hell it should have ever gone to 7 games, and they played lethargic in Game 4 and 5 and got pounded. And no Stanley Cup winning team get drilled as often as they did in the playoffs last year in those 2 games and all those games in Boston. You're up 1-0 with the 2 minutes left and a power play in Game 7 on your home ice, and you allow a shorthanded tying goal. That is inexcusable. Vigneault should have called a timeout to make sure that everybody was on the same page there. Complete mismanagement. I think that deeply affected this team in terms of their maybe psyche, that they were a little bit fragile with everything. I know they played pretty good against Nashville and San Jose, but a bounce here, a bounce there, and you never know the way those series could have turned the other way. And you could say this year the bounces didn't go their way with LA, which is probably the case, but that's what happens. It all evens out in the long run when you want to have this theory of trying to win these games by 1 goal and keep it tight instead of maybe trying to get some separation in them. So that's my issue with the way the team was playing this year. And you just hear these comments from the Sedins after. It's almost like they're delusional, these guys. Oh, we played the games we wanted to. They were all 1-goal games and we figured that our skill would take over at the end. What skill are you guys talking about? LA is equally as skilled, if not more, when you look at their player for player on their roster. And if the Sedins want to come out here and talk about all this tremendous skill that was going to take over at the end of these games, then go out there and score. Let's see you guys do something. Because you didn't do anything against Boston last year in the playoffs. You didn't do anything against Nashville. The only series you really dominated was against San Jose, because that was the weakest defensive team you went up against. So instead of talking about this and then the Sedins making these guarantees last year that they were going to win after Game 6 after getting thumped in Boston again, keep your mouth shut and get out there and play. Because to be honest, I'm not even convinced that these guys are the proper players to build a team around to win a Stanley Cup. Yes, they made it to the Cup Finals last year, and you can't take that away from them. But considering they've been in the league for a decade now, they've only made it past the second round once, and that was last year. So, they're not the toughest guys. They're not quick. They like to play this little puck possession cycle, and it works in the regular season against bad defensive teams, but with good down-low defensive coverage, it ain't working in the playoffs, and you got to be more physical and take the puck to the net. And I understand at $6 million, they are a bargain. They average a point a game or more. They're MVP candidates, so management's in a tough spot, and they probably can't get rid of them, but nonetheless, you know what, just keep your mouth shut instead of making comments like that, because I really do believe that that is the core problem here, and they'll never come out and admit it, and they'll never trade them because they see the value in the contracts instead of just looking at the way the players perform in the playoffs instead of the regular season numbers. And I'll end it with this. Some of the trades that, Gillis made really did not make a lot of sense. You see what happens with this Booth trade here. I never really saw this coming. I thought that he would have been that secondary guy that would help Kessler on the second line, but he was absolutely useless down the stretch. He went 17 games without a goal. That is inexcusable for the Selke Trophy winner from last year that makes $5 million, that's supposedly the best second-line center in the NHL, and that was a major problem with this team. You guys want to go out there and be the best. The star players have to rise to the occasion, and offensively, none of them did it whatsoever. There's only so much you can expect out of the Higginses and the Lapierres and the Hansons and all these third and fourth line guys. If anything, they're the ones that played well, not the star players. They're the ones that let the team down. And, Booth was one of these guys that was supposed to come in. And you look at what Samuelson did in Florida this year and in the playoffs. He's having way more success. He makes half the amount of money. And we have a long-term commitment with Booth now. And this one could really come back to bite the team. So a lot of these trades here for the team is really coming back to bite them. And I think the number one issue that I've said throughout this rant here and will continue to throughout the future was the fact that they made a big mistake not getting rid of one of the two goalies, whichever one, because you add another forward or defenseman to the roster with any one of those goalies and they have a much better chance of winning this year, and that's what really disappointed me the most. So that's the way I see things breaking down. This team isn't screwed. They still have enough talent that they'll make the playoffs guaranteed next year, but are they good enough to win the Stanley Cup? Who really knows? Obviously, it's a lot easier said than done to be here ranting and raving than in Gillis' chair, because they're not easy decisions to make. But if this year wasn't a bit of a wake-up call that there needs to be some drastic changes, then I don't know what else could be. Anyways, keep checking out the podcast and the website, guys. Thank you for your support. I'd love to hear your opinions on everything. Feel free to put some comments underneath here, and we'll get into a bit of a heated debate on the Vancouver Canucks.